It is a beautiful, almost fall day here in Cincinnati, Ohio. We are enjoying those last few summer days, but as you can see, the beautiful red bud behind me is starting to turn to their autumn colors. And so it's a wonderful time to be out in the garden. And I really appreciate all of you spending time visiting us at the Botany Bistro. My name is Mary Dudley, and I am the Ecology Education Manager at the Civic Garden Center here in Cincinnati, Ohio. We have done 8 sessions of the Bistro so far. This is our 8th. And so I'm really excited to talk about plant systematics and taxonomy today. So if this is your first time here for the Bistro, welcome. We take botanical concepts and we break them down into bite-sized pieces. We also enjoy talking about foods that we are eating and applying botanical concepts to them as well. So if you want to play a little bit of catch-up, you can plan on seeing our other Bistro videos. We've gone over plant anatomy, we've talked about plant morphology, and we spent some time discussing basic botanical principles, both current and historical. And so today is going to be a neat day where we really talk about the classification systems for plants that we are currently using. Just a little bit about the Civic Garden Center. If you haven't been here, we would love for you to come and visit. We have a big event tomorrow. It's going to be our fall native plant sale. And from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., we're going to welcome anyone and everyone who would like to learn a little bit more about native plants in our region, buy some plants to take home, listen to some educational talks, enjoy the music, and we'll also have activities for children. So if you're in the Cincinnati area and you'd like to have a fun Saturday, please come and join us tomorrow. All right, so I am running this Bistro just to be able to convey some important information for gardeners, botanists, horticulturists, landscapers, anyone that's interested in learning a little bit more about the scientific study of plants. The foundational knowledge that I have gained from my formal studies as a botanist has enabled me to accurately diagnose certain plant issues, be able to identify plants with some ease, although I do enjoy the help of some of our wonderful current apps and good published books. But also just having that comfort level of, okay, I understand how this plant functions, and so I can better care for it and plan for it in my landscape. At the end of our talk today, I'll open up the chat, so please be sure to save your questions and stick around so that we can have a conversation with each other. So let's think about a little bit about what is systematics and taxonomy. I'll share with you what I'm having for lunch. I hope you're all enjoying your lunch today. I have this wonderful sweet potato, curry, spinach, chicken stew that I made. Smells so good. And it has a lot of garlic in it and ginger and some coconut milk as well. So I'm really excited to munch on this during our Bistro today. And I'll be mentioning the plant families for some of these plants that I'm going to be eating during our talk today. And so there are differences between systematics and taxonomy. We'll go over those a little bit today, but the main concept of what we're going to discuss is how we organize and name different plant species. We will continue this discussion on September 22nd with part 2, and that will start again at noon right here in the same Google Meet, so please feel free to join us. And we will have a little bit of homework after class. It's always nice if people post on social media or share things with us. And so your homework for this particular session is going to be to tell us your favorite plant family. There are more than 391,000 identified plant species. Those are just the ones that we have named, categorized, documented. And so we find more annually that we are also adding to that number. And about 369,000 of those are flowering plants, and they would be in the angiosperm group. We'll talk a little bit about some of the other groups today as well. And so our human eye is definitely drawn to plants that have that wow factor. We like to see the flowers, we like to see that beautiful foliage, but we are still discovering littler plants, smaller plants that are growing in cracks and crevices, up in higher elevations, and even in lower depths as well. So kind of those harder to reach spots tend to be the best places for new plant discoveries. Although sometimes they're right under our nose. And so we really need to know what we're identifying so that we're able to classify it. With nearly 400,000 different options, we have to come up with a uniform way for us to be able to know what plants are called and how to communicate that with the larger scientific community. So you may have heard the word scientific name. Typically, that's going to be a name that is used across cultures, across continents. And so we prefer using a scientific name to a common name, because plants can have multiple common names, but they typically just have one widely accepted scientific name. And so that way we know exactly what type of species we're talking about, and there's less confusion when we're doing our research. And so we have also had to change certain groupings of plants based on current genetic testing. We discussed morphology in a previous Bistro session, and morphology is looking at the outward structures of plants, the external structures, and that was, for a long time, the only way that you could really identify some of these characteristics. Now that we have wonderful microscopy technicians, we have different tools, and we have genetic testing, we're able to look at plants in different ways and really say, oh, is this plant supposed to be in this group, or should it be more closely related to another group? So that is really systematics. Systematics is concerned with the evolution and relationships of plants. Taxonomy is the classification system that we use. So I am not going to use these terms interchangeably. I disagree with the Wikipedia definition that says that there's no clear defining line. I think that there is. And if you talk to botanists, I think that they would agree. So they are two different types of thought, two different fields of study. We'll focus more on taxonomy today, and we'll get into systematics in part 2. So the word taxonomy originates from two words, taxis, meaning arrangement, and nomos, meaning laws. So basically, it's dealing with a classification of plants that is governed by a certain set of rules, of criteria. If it meets this criteria, then it's in this group. And a lot of times we'll use something called a dichotomous key to organize our characteristics of plants and be able to find out what that plant is and identify it correctly. Some of you might be using a wonderful app that's your favorite on your phone or your computer to take a picture of a plant, and then it will give you one, maybe more options on what that plant could be. That plant app is using in the background a dichotomous key that someone has programmed into it. If you get a book, a field guide, that has a good key at the beginning of it, then you'll be actually going through those steps manually. I will say that the technology has really sped up the rate at which you can identify a plant. The accuracy is usually pretty good, and it's a lot less weight to carry around when you're on a plant walk. You don't have to carry around 5 or 6 books. You can usually just have your phone with you. But I'm here for both of them. So Luddites are welcome in this space, and I still have lots of wonderful field guides at home that I like. And so we have to figure out a way to classify things. Human nature is just drawn to categorizing things. We like to organize things by color, by alphabet, by numerical order. We don't need to get into the debate on how you're going to organize your, records or your CDs, or, if you still have VHS. Everybody has their own system of organization, and it works well for them. And so we have had to do the same thing as we start to categorize plants. So the goals of taxonomy are really identification, characterization, getting all those different characteristics of that species put together, classification and arranging them in groups with similar species, and then giving that name into the scientific community so that it becomes widely used. So one of the other things we're going to talk about towards the end of this discussion today is how these different species are documented and kept. And so we'll talk a little bit about those special places at the end. So about more than 2,000 years ago, Aristotle classified plants on basic morphological characters, such as it's an herb, which means it does not have a woody stem. This is a shrub. It has a woody stem, but it has maybe multiple stems or stays low when it grows. And then this is a tree. It has a large trunk. So that was kind of some simple classifications that happened. Theophrastus, who we have discussed in several sessions before, attempted to arrange plants in groups based on how they reproduce. Now, this concept of using reproductive characteristics of plants was picked up by Carl Linnaeus, who is considered the modern father of taxonomy. And in 1735, he published a book called Systema Naturae, and he gave a hierarchical system of classification that is still widely used today. Floral and reproductive characteristics of plants tend to be more uniform depending on the species and not depending on the location of growth. For example, if you have a plant that is growing in shade, the leaves of that plant may be a little bit larger than that same species growing in full sun. The leaves may also be darker or may not express variegation the same way it would in full sun. However, those floral characteristics, the reproductive parts, tend to be the same even if they are planted in different locations. So using the floral characteristics has really helped people identify plants reliably. And so that's what Theophrastus started out and we have continued to work with today. And so Linnaeus gave us this binomial nomenclature system. And binomial is the term used because we have two names for plants. And we use the genus is the first part of the name and the species is the second part of the name. So let me back up a little bit and discuss how we even got to genus and species. So some of you might be able to dig this up from maybe middle high school or high school biology, but there are different classes that we use, different divisions, different categories, and it starts off with kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. All right, so that doesn't quite roll off the tongue for me, but if you can remember those 7 different groups, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, then you'll be able to understand how this classification system works. Kingdom is the largest group. And then you have a subdivision under that with the phylum and then the class. They get more specific as you go down all the way to the species level where just one particular type of plant has that species name. That specific epithet is also something that it's called. Now, that being said, there are variations even amongst species. So you can have a singular genus species name but have variations within that. And so some of these plants that might have the same scientific name might look different because they are variations of that. But we'll save the confusing part for the end. And so the phylogenetic system of classification developed after the publication of Darwin's theory of evolution. Apart from using morphological characteristics found from fossil records, we're using those genetic tests as well. And some things have had to be moved around. For example, the plant family that maples were in when I was in school, in graduate school, has changed. And so that's based on genetic testing and different groupings. And so just thinking about which characteristics we're using to group these together so that it's widely accepted by most biologists. So there can be some contention between morphologists and geneticists about how plants are related to each other. And so it's a pretty interesting part of the field when science, they have very passionate views on some of that. So let's talk about kingdoms. Kingdom is the highest rank of taxonomic organization. And different organisms are grouped together through certain fundamental characteristics like plants, animals, fungi, right? There are a couple other of them as well. And then we have phylum. I have also seen the term division used instead of phylum. So sometimes you'll see that term division, particularly when we're talking about plants. Phylum tends to be more used for animal species, but they can be used interchangeably. A phylum is a taxonomic level that sits below kingdom, above class. There are 12 recognized plant phyla, and there are 7 living examples of these plant phyla, and 5 of them are found only as fossils. So that's pretty neat. When we get into our paleobotany section, stay tuned for more information on those. But the living examples include our hornworts, our mosses, liverworts, club mosses and scale trees, ferns, seed plants, and horsetails. And so those are all living examples, and so you could see those today. And then of the 5 that are only known as fossils, they are, I am going to butcher these names, I apologize. Cladoxa, Sibia, progymnosperms, rhinophytes, chimerophytes, and zosterophils. And those are extinct plants, as far as we know. So if you've got your discovery hat on and you want to really get out there and look for plants, there are some times where we think that plants have been removed from an area or no longer exist, and sometimes we get to find little remnants of them left. So keep your eyes open, see if we can change that. And so then we get under the phylum or division, we get into the class and then order. And these are just additional ways to sort through some of these categories so that we are taking different characteristics. So again, think about this dichotomous key. And let's think about a simple example. So let's say that you're organizing something in your home. Let's say fruits. You have like a bowl of fruits. You've got an apple, you've got an orange, you've got a banana, you've got a key lime. And so you're trying to organize these. You could use color, you could use shape, you could use size, you could use weight. And so there's just different levels of how we like to organize things so that we're really sure that by the end of it, everything has its own group, because we don't want things to be grouped together that could cause that confusion. So when we get down to that species level, we want to make sure that we're just dealing with one type. And so then we have family. So really, as a general gardener, horticulturist, we're going to be looking closer at families of plants, things that are grouped together because of common characteristics, and then looking at the genus and species. So really those last 3 are the ones that we're going to focus more on. Plant family names are easy to recognize because they end in ACE, actually spelling like ACEAE. The letters there at the end of the name are a good sign that that is a family. So for example, our Solanaceae family it's also called our nightshade family, but that's going to have tomatoes, potatoes, peppers, and eggplants. And so we have a lot of different things in that group that we use in our gardens on a regular basis. We also have the Fabaceae, and they're fabulous. But they are going to be our beans, our peas, our peanuts, and our clovers. And we know that a lot of members in this family fix nitrogen through their roots by mycorrhizal associations and nodules that grow on their roots. And so when we're looking at different ways to build soil, we look to the Fabaceae family, which is why farmers rotate crops from corn and soybeans. They're getting the soybeans to help add available nitrogen into the soil so that the corn can use it the following year. The Cucurbitaceae is our squash, our pumpkins, melons, and gourds. So a curcubit has certain characteristics that other plants don't. And so knowing how those plants function and what pests might be drawn to them really helps out the average gardener to say, okay, I need to pay attention to the different areas in my garden. And then Brassicaceae is a very big one too. That's your kales, your cabbage, your broccolis, and your collards. So those are some of the bigger plant families. Other characteristics that I like to use is our mints. So the mint family has some pretty dead-on characteristics. When someone brings me a plant, the first thing I do is take a look at that stem. If I feel that that stem is a square, has ridges on it, I roll it between my fingers. I'm like, oh, square stem is a pretty good sign that that is probably in the mint family, Lamiaceae. And so then I'll be able to say, okay, I can narrow this down. Let me try to think about that family and get to the identification that I need. So that's a pretty good one if you're ever out and just looking at your herbs. Lemon balm has a nice square stem that you can feel with your fingers, and then the regular mints that we have. But we have a lot of mints growing in our region, so you can identify them by that. And then we have the genus. The genus forms the first part of that binomial scientific name that I discussed earlier. It is in italics, and it should be capitalized. So the first part of the scientific name is the genus. And the genus is a group, so there will be several plants that have the same genus name, but within that genus name, there will not be repeats of the specific epithet, the species, which comes last. So those common characteristics that are shared in a genus, in the genera, are more broken down into species. And we really identify a species as an interbreeding group of individuals that are capable of producing fertile offspring that can reproduce themselves. There are subspecies and variants to reflect variation within a species. And so that's important to note, especially in a lot of our agricultural crops, because you can have, different colors of broccoli, for example. Those are not going to be different species. They're going to be variants of those subspecies. And so we can enjoy the different things that we are able to cultivate, but we're not changing that species name because of a new color of bloom necessarily of a same species. So just be on the lookout for that. Not all species plants are going to look identical to each other, especially because humans are so good and so eager to kind of manipulate and play around with the plants that we have in our lives. And so the scientific name includes that capitalized genera, that genus name, followed by the specific epithet. The specific epithet should also appear in italics, and the first letter of that word is lowercase. So you have an italicized genus and species with the genus being capital. Now after that, you might see additional things. You might see something with an initial behind it. You might see something that says VAR with a period. And so what does that mean? Well, let's think about that. The initial typically goes for the person that named that plant. So a lot of them will say L, and that is an abbreviation for Linnaeus. Carl Linnaeus named thousands of species in his time. And so his name is following a lot of those different specific epithets. But you might see some other ones in there, other things that people have named. And then if you're seeing a hybrid species, there might be an X after that, and it will have a second set of genus and species to know that, okay, this is a cross between two different plants. or it might say VAR and then have a word, a variation of that species. So that's really kind of the main meat of the way that we have named plants over time. And a lot of them are based on Latin. And so you can kind of think, okay, I'm hearing this word alba, what's going on with that? Oh, it means it has white flowers in it. And there's this other characteristic that might come from another Latin term. So kind of reviving that language that is not readily spoken, but it gives botanists an extra way to communicate with each other. So we do speak a lot of scientific Latin in the botanical world. It's a lot of fun. And so when you're thinking about the importance of this, you might say, well, why does it matter? Well, there are like 300 species of campanula. So if you want a very specific type of bellflower, you need to be able to say what you want, so that you know that you're getting the one that has the right height, it has the right bloom color, it has the right bloom time. It will work for your soils in your region. And so using these scientific names is a great way to make sure that what you're talking about is understood by everyone else, and you're not watering down or diluting the information that you are giving or getting because of common name misconceptions. There are dozens of common names that people use interchangeably, and it can be really confusing, especially if you're trying to get something specific from the nursery or really figure out and identify what is in your yard. So understanding and kind of getting used to these scientific names is a lot of fun. I highly recommend that you think about, just start with what's in your garden or what's in your plate today. So I did a little bit of research on what was in my plate today. And I've got some sweet potatoes. They're in the Convolvulaceae, so that is in the morning glory family. So who knows? Sweet potatoes and morning glories are hanging out at the same family reunion. I've also got some spinach. That's in the Amaranthaceae, amaranth family. And so that's really neat to think about. I've got some cilantro in here as well, delicious, and that's in the Apiaceae. There are 3,700 species in that family. It includes carrots, celery, parsley. So just starting to kind of research what's on your plate or right outside your window is a good way to start to get into the flow of it. I think that you'll enjoy it if you're a nerd like me, because I totally do. All right. So we've talked a little bit about how these are arranged, how these plant tags are arranged. When I'm looking at a plant tag at a nursery, the common name typically is very large, and sometimes you have to search for that scientific name, but usually they are in italics, so that's a good signal for that. And so I'm able to say, oh, okay, great. I did want some Baptisia, but they're listing it as blue false indigo. That's okay. I make sure I double check that tag so that it does have the type of Baptisia that I want. So just be on the lookout for that. There's a lot of information that you can learn. And so I am going to leave our discussion of cladograms and systematics for part 2, so don't miss that in 2 weeks. But let me talk just a little bit about how we are able to identify species and make sure that it's not a new species or is a new species. So there are basically these places like plant libraries called herbariums. An herbarium is a place where plants are kept and for generations. It's an amazing collection that very few people actually get the chance to see. And so the first steps that you would take if you think you found a new species or you want to ensure the identification of a species is that you would carefully collect that species. You would document where you got it from, time of year, possibly time of day, climate conditions, soil conditions, as many observations as you could make about that space. You don't want to harvest a plant that might be endangered or have very little population around it. So if you're going to be trying this at home, please be sure to collect safely and not on public land, making sure that you have permissions to do this. But you would want to actually dig up as much of that plant as you could as well. Maybe there's a bulb under there or a rhizome or a tuber. You want to see if you can get that root structure intact when you are collecting a plant. And so you can dig up that plant and you collect it and you press it. So we need to get the moisture out of it in order to preserve the specimen. And so there are plant presses that you can buy. Pressed flowers are pretty popular to put into cards or in potpourri. But if you're doing an herbarium specimen, you're trying to keep a lot of that intact. You want to make sure that the leaves are flat. Sometimes you'll fold a leaf over because you might see different venation patterns on certain sides of the leaf. And so you're pressing that down into a plant press, usually for several weeks, with special paper that will help absorb some of that moisture. You want to get all that moisture out because you cannot store herbarium specimens that are not properly preserved. They'll mold and they could ruin the collection. So it's really important that they are very dried out. After they've been dried out and pressed, then you can mount them onto special acid-free paper. And you have a little card there that has your description of where you collected it. You might have a little package there that has seeds in it if there were seeds around. If it was a particularly large or 3D specimen, you might need to use a razor blade to cut it so that it's a little bit shorter. So you might have a little pocket of something that you're saving there for additional identification. But you've got, basically this beautifully pressed specimen, and you can take it to an herbarium and they can identify it and they, oh, wow, okay, this is the exact species that we collected 50 years ago, but in a different place, and maybe the bloom is a little bit earlier. So these plant libraries, these herbaria, when you walk in, it might not seem that impressive, but they're a lot of times just file cabinets, regular file cabinets, and just stacked. All these little folders are stacked. Maybe there's some mothballs in there. Make sure that we're keeping everything nice and dry. But just generations of knowledge. And this is a great way for us to be able to identify how the climate is shifting and where these plants are going or where they've come from. So when we say that a plant is endangered or extinct, how do we really know that? Well, there are herbaria around the world, and a lot of times they have now digitized their collections, so you're able to Google online and see their entire collection in digital form. And then they can identify these different closely related species to say, okay, is it a new species? Is it the same species? Is it a variation of a species? And what conditions has it been growing in traditionally? And if the bloom time is earlier or later, is that a climate related phenomenon? Or is this something that we need to gather more data on? So it's a really neat thing to be able to see these collections. And so I highly recommend that you do some searching and find out a little bit more about them. We have some wonderful herbaria all over the country, and there's lots of redundancy. So I had some professors that were working in the Bahamas trying to catalog a lot of those species. And there is a sense of urgency to do this because we might lose those species with some of the different things that we're feeling right now, fires, hurricanes. So we really want to protect this genetic diversity and this flora. And so some of the species that are living in herbaria will have several different individuals collected, and they'll be sent to different herbaria around the country or around the world to protect them in case something were to happen to those herbaria. So these very treasured documents that we have. And so they are, of course, susceptible to lots of other things, and thinking about how we've lost whole libraries before. And so making sure that we have that redundancy to be able to salvage some of that. There is really neat research happening as well with being able to extract some small bits of DNA from some of these documented species. And being able to grow those and produce these plants again that sometimes have been lost in certain regions. So that's a pretty new science being headed up by some amazing researchers, some of whom are right here in Cincinnati working at Crew at the Cincinnati Zoo. So really, really exciting stuff. I recently got plant press that I have been utilizing on my walks around my yard, and just documenting, starting to document, when are things blooming? When did I collect this? How tall was it at the time? And then, I can go back to that same plant 20 years from now and compare it with a new collection and say, okay, are they changing? Are we seeing any differences here? But just really collecting those intentionally and purposefully and holding on to them so that we can use those in the future. So that was our talk today about plant systematics and taxonomy. We did focus more on taxonomy than systematics, but trying to think about some of these plant families that we use in everyday life and are fairly common. I'm sure you've probably got a couple maybe lily ACE plants in your yard, maybe some Solon ACE plants in your garden. So your homework is to find out about a plant family that you really enjoy and share that with us on social media. So I want to thank you all for coming today. I'm going to turn on the chat so we can answer any questions that you might have.